The snow fell in thick, lazy flakes that afternoon, covering the wooden platform of Edge Hollow's train depot in a pristine white blanket. Annabelle Mayfield stood alone among the scattered cargo crates and mail sacks, her worn leather valise clutched in both hands. The hem of her traveling dress was already damp from the melting snow, but she barely noticed. Her eyes were fixed on the broad-shouldered figure retreating down Main Street. Clark Ridley hadn't even helped her with her trunk. 5 months of letters. 5 months of promises written in his careful script, speaking of a life together, of the forge he ran, of the small house behind it where they would start their family. She had memorized every word, carried them across 3 territories like precious stones. Now those words felt like ash in her mouth. The scar had changed everything. She touched it unconsciously, her fingers tracing the raised line that ran from just below her left ear down to her collar. The fire had been 8 years ago, but Clark had looked at it as if the flame still danced across her skin. His face had transformed in an instant, from eager anticipation to poorly concealed revulsion. "I need a wife who won't make folks stare in church," he'd said, not quite meeting her eyes. "You understand?" She understood perfectly. She understood that the photograph she'd sent had been carefully angled. She understood that 5 months of correspondence meant nothing when weighed against her imperfection. She understood that she was, once again, alone. The wind picked up, driving the snow sideways across the platform. Annabelle pulled her shawl tighter, though it did little against the mountain cold. Clark had offered to pay for her return passage, thrown the offer over his shoulder like a bone to a dog. She'd left his money on the bench where he'd set it. Pride was all she had left, and she'd freeze before she'd surrender it. The depot was empty now, the station master having retreated to his warm office after the last passenger departed. Through the frosted window, she could see the glow of his pot-belly stove. The next train wouldn't come for 3 days, 3 days in a town where she knew no one, had no money for lodging, and no prospect of employment. Annabelle dragged her trunk to the lee side of the building, where the wind couldn't reach. The wooden wall was rough against her back as she sank down beside her meager possessions. 24 years old, and this was what she'd come to, huddled behind a train depot like a vagrant, her dreams of a new life as dead as winter grass. She'd been so certain when she'd answered Clark's advertisement in the Matrimonial Times, a blacksmith seeking a capable woman of good character for matrimony and partnership in growing western town. She was capable. She could cook, sew, keep house, tend a garden. She could read and write and figure sums. She'd helped raise her younger siblings after mother died, managed her father's household until he remarried a woman who made it clear Annabelle's presence was no longer required. The scar hadn't mattered in letters. On paper, she was whole. Twilight came early in the mountains, purple shadows stretching across the snow. The temperature dropped with the sun. Annabelle's fingers were numb inside her thin gloves, her teeth chattering despite her clenched jaw. She'd noticed a woodpile behind the depot. Perhaps she could fashion some sort of windbreak, survive the night. She was struggling to drag a piece of cordwood when she heard the footsteps, slow, deliberate, crunching through the fresh snow. Her hands stilled on the rough bark. It wasn't safe for a woman alone after dark, especially a stranger. She pressed herself against the woodpile, hoping whoever it was would pass by. The footsteps stopped. "Ma'am." The voice was low, careful, like someone approaching a spooked horse. Annabelle turned slowly, ready to run if necessary, though where she would go in an unfamiliar town, she didn't know. A man stood at the corner of the depot, tall and broad in a snow-dusted duster. The last light of day caught the planes of his face, weathered but not old, perhaps 35, with dark whiskers and eyes that seemed black in the shadows. He held his hands slightly away from his body, palms visible, the gesture of a man showing he meant no harm. "Didn't mean to startle you," he said. His voice had a rumble to it, like distant thunder. "Saw someone moving back here, thought they might need help." Annabelle straightened, lifting her chin. "I'm quite well. Thank you. His eyes took in her traveling dress, the valise, the trunk. Then they found the scar. She waited for the familiar flicker of distaste, the quick glance away. Instead, his gaze moved to her face and stayed there, steady and unreadable. Train doesn't come again until Thursday, he said. I'm aware. Temperature's dropping fast. Won't hit 0, but it'll come close. I said I'm fine. He studied her for a moment longer, then reached inside his duster. Annabelle tensed, but he only pulled out a folded blanket. Thick wool, army surplus by the look of it. My place has a barn out back, he said, setting the blanket on a nearby crate. It's warm, dry. Got a room in the loft where my hired hands stay during roundup. It's empty now. Annabelle's pride warred with the cold seeping into her bones. I have no money for lodging. Didn't ask for any. Then what are you asking for? He was quiet for a moment, snow gathering on the brim of his hat. Nothing, just offering a warm place to sleep. Men don't offer women shelter without expecting payment of some kind. His mouth tightened, the first real emotion she'd seen from him. Some don't, that's true, but you'll freeze out here, and that helps no one. Why do you care what happens to a stranger? He glanced at the depot, then back at her. Saw Clark Ridley at the saloon an hour ago. Heard him bragging about sending his mail-order bride back where she came from. Said she was damaged goods. His voice hardened on the last words. Any woman who'd travel all this way deserves better than freezing to death because one fool can't see past his own nose. The casual cruelty of Clark's words, damaged goods, like she was a cracked plate or torn fabric, made her throat tight. But she kept her voice steady. And you're different from him. Ma'am, I run cattle, break horses, and mind my own business. I'm offering you a dry barn and a warm meal because it's the decent thing to do. Come morning, you can figure your next move. But you won't figure anything if you're frozen solid. Annabelle looked at the blanket, then at the darkening sky. Snow was falling harder now, already covering her footprints. She thought of her siblings, warm in their beds back in Ohio, unaware their elder sister was weighing her pride against possible death. I don't even know your name, she said finally. Carter Rowe. I have a spread about a mile north of town. Annabelle Mayfield. He touched the brim of his hat. Miss Mayfield, my wagon's out front. Your decision. He turned and walked away, not waiting for her answer, not pressuring. She could hear his boots on the platform. Unhurried. In a moment, he'd be gone, and she'd be alone with her pride and the killing cold. Annabelle grabbed the blanket and her valise. Mr. Rowe. He stopped, turned. I'll need help with my trunk. The corner of his mouth lifted slightly. Not quite a smile, but close. He came back, lifted her trunk as if it weighed nothing, and led the way to a weathered wagon waiting in the street. 2 horses stamped and blew steam in the cold air. Carter secured her trunk in the bed, then offered his hand to help her up to the bench seat. His palm was calloused, warm even through her thin glove. He held her hand only as long as necessary, then moved to the other side of the wagon. The blanket he'd given her was military indeed. U.S. Army, stenciled on one corner. She wrapped it around herself as he took up the reins. Thank you, she said quietly. He made a sound that might have been acknowledgement and clicked to the horses. The wagon rolled forward into the snowy darkness, leaving the depot and all her shattered plans behind. Annabelle didn't look back. There was nothing there for her now. The road wound up into the foothills, snow muffling the sound of wheels and hooves. Carter drove in silence, comfortable with it in a way that city folk never were. Annabelle found herself stealing glances at his profile, trying to read this stranger who'd appeared like something out of the wilderness itself. After a while, he spoke. You had supper? No. Maria left a pot of stew on the stove. She cooks for me a few times a week. Your wife? My neighbor. Her husband died last winter. I help with her heavy work. She keeps me from living on burnt beans and coffee." They crested a rise, and Annabelle saw lights below. A house, barn, and outbuildings arranged in a rough square, lamplight glowing warm through windows. It looked solid, established, nothing fancy but well-maintained. "It's not much," Carter said, as if apologizing. "It's more than I have," Annabelle replied without thinking, then felt heat rise in her cheeks despite the cold. He glanced at her, something shifting in his expression. "We all start somewhere, Miss Mayfield. No shame in that." As they descended toward the ranch, Annabelle pulled the army blanket tighter around her shoulders. She didn't know this man, didn't know what tomorrow would bring. But for tonight, she would be warm. For tonight, that was enough. The barn, when they reached it, was indeed warm, smelling of hay and horses and leather. Carter lit a lantern, the golden light revealing neat stalls, well-organized tech. Tools hung precisely on the walls. He was a man who took care of what was his. "Ladder to the loft is there," he said, pointing. "Room small but clean. There's more blankets up there, and a wash basin. I'll bring that stew in a few minutes." Annabelle climbed carefully, her skirts hampering her progress. The loft room was as promised, small, clean, with a narrow bed, a chair, and hooks for clothing. A small window looked out toward the main house. It was better than many places she'd stayed while traveling west. When she came back down, Carter was ladling stew into a bowl from a pot he'd brought from the house. The smell made her stomach clench with hunger. She hadn't eaten since morning, too nervous about meeting Clark to manage breakfast on the train. "Sit," he said, indicating a bench near the tack room. She sat. He handed her the bowl and a spoon, then leaned against a post, arms crossed. The stew was thick with beef and vegetables, seasoned with herbs she couldn't identify. It was quite possibly the best thing she'd ever tasted. "This is wonderful," she said between bites. "Maria knows her business." They fell into silence again, but it wasn't uncomfortable. The barn was warm. Her hunger was easing. And for the first time in hours, Annabelle felt her shoulders drop from their defensive hunch. "I know what you're thinking," she said suddenly. Carter raised an eyebrow. "You're wondering about the scar? How I got it?" "No, ma'am, I wasn't." She looked up from her bowl, surprised. "Everyone wonders." "Everyone's not me." He shifted his weight, looking out the barn door at the falling snow. "We all carry marks. Some just show more than others." Annabelle studied him in the lantern light. There was something in the way he held himself, a carefulness that spoke of old pain carefully managed. She wondered what marks he carried, visible or not. "I'll work for my keep," she said. "I can cook, clean, mend. I'm strong." "We'll talk about it tomorrow. Tonight, you rest." He took her empty bowl, then headed for the door. At the threshold, he paused. "Miss Mayfield." "Yes." "Don't let one fool's blindness make you doubt your worth. Man who can't see past a scar can't see much of anything that matters." Then he was gone, disappearing into the swirl of snow, leaving Annabelle alone with the horses and her whirling thoughts. She climbed back to the loft room, changed into her nightgown, and burrowed under the pile of blankets. Through the small window, she could see the lights of the main house. Smoke rose from the chimney, straight up in the still air. Somewhere in town, Clark Ridley was probably warm in his bed, congratulating himself on his narrow escape from a scarred bride. Let him. She was done with men who saw only surfaces. As sleep finally took her, Annabelle thought about Carter Rowe's hands scarred themselves. She'd noticed, marked by rope burns and old injuries. Working hands, honest hands, hands that offered help without demanding payment. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. She was still alone, still without prospects, still a stranger in a strange place. But tonight she was warm and fed, and a man had looked at her scar without flinching. It was more grace than she'd expected to find at the end of this terrible day. Maybe, just maybe, it would be enough to build on. Annabelle closed her eyes and let the sound of horses breathing below lull her to sleep, while outside the snow continued to fall, covering the old world in pristine white, making everything new. The cold woke her before dawn, despite the pile of blankets. The mountain air had crept through every crack in the loft walls, turning her small refuge into an icebox. Annabelle lay still for a moment, disoriented, before memory crashed back the train depot. Clark's rejection. Carter Rowe's unexpected kindness. Through the small window, she could see stars fading in a lightening sky. No snow falling now, but what had already fallen lay thick and unmarred across the landscape. She dressed quickly, her fingers clumsy with cold, then carefully folded the blankets and tidied the small space. Whatever happened today, she wouldn't leave disorder behind. The ladder down was treacherous in her skirts, but she managed it. The horses nickered softly at her appearance, their breath steaming in the frigid air. The barn was warmer than the loft had been, body heat from the animals taking the worst edge off the cold. Annabelle found a pump and basin near the tack room. The water was so cold it burned, but she washed her face and hands, then attempted to tame her hair into something respectable. Her small mirror showed what she expected: pale skin made paler by cold, dark circles under gray eyes, and always, the scar drawing its path down her neck. She was repinning her hair when she heard footsteps outside. The barn door slid open, revealing Carter silhouetted against the pearl-gray dawn. He carried a steaming mug in each hand. "Coffee," he said, offering one to her. She took it gratefully, wrapping both hands around the hot ceramic. The first sip was strong enough to strip paint, but it spread warmth through her chest like liquid fire. "Thank you," she managed. He nodded, sipping his own coffee while checking on the horses. He moved with the unconscious efficiency of a man who'd done these tasks thousands of times. Annabelle watched him work, noting the care he took with each animal. "I need to ask you something," she said when he finished with the horses. He turned, waiting. "Why did you really help me the truth?" Carter was quiet for a long moment, looking out the open barn door at his snow-covered land. "My sister," he said finally. "She had a birthmark across half her face. Port wine stain, they called it, like someone had splashed burgundy across her cheek." Annabelle's hand moved unconsciously to her own scar. "She was the kindest soul God ever made." Carter continued. "Smart, funny, could sing like a meadowlark, but all anyone saw was that mark. She died at 19. Never married. Never had a suitor who looked past it." He turned back to her. "When I saw you at that depot, saw how Ridley had left you, I thought of her. Thought maybe I could balance the scales a little." "I'm sorry about your sister." "Her name was Grace." A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "She would have liked you. She always admired women with backbone." They stood in comfortable silence, drinking their coffee as the sky brightened. Finally, Carter set down his mug. "I've been thinking," he said. "My neighbor, Mrs. Emmeline Hartley, she's getting on in years, mentioned last week she could use help around her place. She raises chickens, keeps a medicine garden, does some healing work for folks in town. Can't pay much, but she's got a spare room." Hope flickered in Annabelle's chest. "Do you think she'd consider me?" "Only one way to find out. I'll take you over after breakfast, if you're willing." "I'm willing." He started for the door, then paused. "Fair warning. Emmeline's got opinions and isn't shy about sharing them. She's been a widow near 20 years and likes it that way. Says husbands are more trouble than help." "She sounds wise," Annabelle said dryly. That earned her an actual smile, brief but genuine. "Come up to the house when you're ready." Maria left biscuits. After he left, Annabelle took a moment to steady herself. A possibility of work, of a place to stay. It was more than she'd dared hope for 12 hours ago. She tidied her appearance as best she could, then made her way across the snowy yard to the main house. The kitchen was everything the barn had been: clean, organized, purposeful. Carter stood at the stove, pushing eggs around a cast-iron pan. The promised biscuits sat on the table, golden and fragrant, alongside a pot of preserves. "Sit," he said without turning. "Food's almost ready." Annabelle sat, looking around the sparse but clean space. No curtains on the windows, no tablecloth, no decorative touches at all. A bachelor's kitchen, functional but lacking warmth. Carter brought over the eggs and bacon, serving her first before himself. They ate in companionable quiet, the only sounds the clink of forks on plates and the pop of wood in the stove. "This is good," she said. "Don't get too impressed. Eggs and bacon are about the extent of my cooking." After breakfast, Carter hitched up the wagon while Annabelle gathered her few belongings. The ride to the Hartley place was shorter than the journey from town, perhaps 2 miles through stands of pine and aspen. The sun was fully up now, making the snow-covered world sparkle like crushed diamonds. Emmeline Hartley's homestead was smaller than Carter's, but somehow more alive. Chickens pecked in a fenced yard despite the snow. Smoke curled from 2 chimneys, and the windows had actual curtains, blue-checked gingham that spoke of a woman's touch. The woman who answered Carter's knock was 70 if she was a day, barely 5 feet tall, with silver hair in a severe bun and eyes like chips of blue flint. She looked Annabelle up and down with the frank assessment of someone who'd lived too long to bother with polite fictions. "So you're the girl Ridley threw over," she said without preamble. Annabelle lifted her chin. "I am... man's a fool. Always was, always will be. Come in before you freeze." The interior of the house was a revelation after Carter's Spartan quarters. Herbs hung from every rafter. Books lined handmade shelves, and a fat orange cat occupied the best chair by the fire. It smelled of lavender and wood smoke and something medicinal but not unpleasant. "I hear you need help," Annabelle said once they were seated at Emmeline's kitchen table, cups of tea steaming before them. Carter had diplomatically withdrawn to tend to something in the barn. "I'm old," Emmeline said bluntly. "My bones complain something fierce in the cold, and these chickens don't tend themselves. The medicine garden needs someone who can bend without creaking, and I've got more mending than my eyes can handle these days." "I can do all of that. Can you read and write?" "Yes, ma'am." "Figure sums." "Yes." "What about birthing ever helped deliver a baby?" Annabelle blinked at the sudden shift. "Twice. My younger sisters?" Emmeline sipped her tea, studying Annabelle over the rim. "What about that scar? Does it bother you if folks stare?" "It bothers me," Annabelle said honestly. "But I've learned to bear it." "Good. Bearing what can't be changed is half of life. Tell me how you got it." Annabelle set down her cup. "House fire when I was 16. My youngest brother was trapped in his room. I got him out, but a burning beam caught me as we ran." "Brother live?" "Yes, he's a teacher now, back in Ohio." "Then it was worth it." The simple statement, delivered without sentiment, somehow meant more than all the platitudes Annabelle had heard over the years. Emmeline poured more tea, her movements precise despite her gnarled fingers. "Here's my offer," the old woman said. "Room and board, plus $2 a week. You help with the chickens, the garden, the house, and when folks come for remedies, you assist me. Some of them can't pay in cash. They bring eggs, vegetables, firewood. We share what comes in." "That's generous," Annabelle said carefully. "It's practical. I need help. You need work. But I'll tell you plain, I won't tolerate laziness, loose behavior, or lies. You live under my roof. You live respectable. I wouldn't have it any other way." "Then we have a deal." Emmeline stood, moving to a door off the kitchen. "Come see your room." The room was small but clean. with a narrow bed, a washstand, and a small wardrobe. A patchwork quilt in blues and yellows covered the bed, and crisp white curtains framed a window that looked out over the medicine garden. "This was my daughter's room," Emmeline said quietly. "She died of fever 15 years back. Been empty since." "I'll take good care of it," Annabel promised. "See that you do." Emmeline's voice was gruff, but Annabel caught the glimmer of moisture in her eyes. "You can move in today if you like. Carter will help with your trunk." They returned to the kitchen to find Carter inside, adding wood to the stove. He looked between them, reading the situation correctly. "I'll fetch your things," he said to Annabel. While he was gone, Emmeline bustled about, showing Annabel where things were kept, explaining the daily routine. The chickens needed feeding twice a day, eggs gathered each morning. The medicine garden required constant attention. Even in winter cold, frames protected some plants. Others had to be brought inside during freezes. "Can you shoot?" Emmeline asked suddenly. "No, ma'am." "We'll fix that. Coyotes and foxes love chicken dinner. Need to be able to protect the flock." Carter returned with Annabel's trunk, setting it in her new room without comment. When he straightened, Annabel touched his sleeve. "Thank you," she said, "for everything." He looked down at her hand on his arm, then up at her face. "You'd have figured something out." "Maybe, but I might have frozen first." "Well," he said, stepping back. "You didn't." He touched his hat brim. "I'll be heading back. Emmeline, you need anything from town this week?" "Just the usual order at Morrison's." Emmeline replied, "And tell that gossipy Sarah Morrison that my new helper is none of her business." Carter's mouth quirked. "I'll pass that along." He left, and Annabel watched through the window as he climbed into his wagon. Just before he took up the reins, he looked back at the house. Their eyes met through the glass, and he touched his hat again before driving away. "That's a good man," Emmeline said from behind her. Annabel turned from the window. "He seems to be—" "Seems nothing. I've known Carter Rowe since he came to these mountains 8 years ago. Never known him to break his word or turn his back on someone in need. Shame about his brother, though. He mentioned losing a brother. Fool boy got caught in a blizzard, trying to prove he was as tough as Carter. Wasn't but 17. Carter found him 3 days later, frozen solid. Blames himself still, though it wasn't his fault." Annabel thought of Carter's careful kindness, the way he'd offered help without pushing. A man carrying his own burden of guilt would understand the weight of old wounds. "Now," Emmeline said briskly, "enough wool gathering. Let me show you how I like the chickens fed." The rest of the day passed in a blur of new tasks and information. The chickens, Annabel discovered, had personalities. The red hen who pecked anyone who came near her favorite nesting box. The elderly rooster who strutted despite having only 3 tail feathers. The black hen who followed Annabel around like a dog. The medicine garden was a marvel of organization, even in winter. Emmeline had managed to keep dozens of plants alive through clever use of cold frames, mulch, and strategic placement. She knew the use of every leaf and root, speaking of them like old friends. "Comfrey for bones, calendula for skin, echinacea for the blood," she murmured, checking each plant with gentle fingers. "They'll teach you their secrets if you listen." By evening, Annabel's head was spinning with new knowledge, but she felt more useful than she had in months. After a simple supper of soup and bread, she sat by the fire, mending one of Emmeline's aprons while the old woman knitted. "You did well today," Emmeline said suddenly. "Thank you. Don't let it go to your head. Tomorrow will be just as much work." Annabel smiled. "I wouldn't expect anything else." Later, in her narrow bed, she listened to the unfamiliar sounds of her new home, the pop of settling wood, the distant cry of an owl, Emmeline's soft snoring from the next room. Through her window, she could see stars brilliant in the clear mountain sky. 24 hours ago, She'd been prepared to freeze to death rather than accept charity. Now she had work, shelter, and the beginning of what might become a new life. All because a quiet cowboy had offered a blanket and a barn. Annabelle touched the scar on her neck, thinking of Grace, the sister who'd never had a chance to find her place in the world, thinking too of Carter, carrying his brother's death like a stone in his chest. They all had their marks, visible and invisible. But maybe, just maybe, that was what would allow them to see each other clearly. In a world full of Clark Ridleys who saw only surfaces, perhaps the scarred could recognize their own kind. She closed her eyes, pulling the quilt up to her chin. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but tonight she was warm, safe, and no longer alone. It was enough. More than enough. It was a beginning. Dawn came early at the Hartley place. Annabelle woke to the sound of roosters competing to announce the new day, their calls sharp in the crisp mountain air. She dressed quickly, her fingers already growing accustomed to working in the cold, and made her way to the kitchen where Emmeline was stoking the fire. "Good, you're up," the old woman said without turning. "Chickens don't wait for slug-a-beds." Annabelle had been living with Emmeline for 3 days now, and already they'd fallen into a comfortable routine. She took the egg basket from its hook and headed out into the pale morning light. The chickens rushed to greet her, knowing she brought breakfast. "Morning, ladies," she murmured, scattering feed across the packed snow. "And you too, Napoleon." The scruffy rooster preened at the attention, strutting among his hens with exaggerated importance. The black hen, whom Annabelle had named Shadow, followed her into the coop as she gathered eggs. 7 this morning, a good haul for winter. She'd learned to move carefully, speaking softly to avoid startling the birds. The red hen still pecked if she moved too fast, but they were reaching an understanding. Back in the kitchen, Emmeline was grinding herbs with a mortar and pestle, the sharp scent of sage filling the air. "Mrs. Abernathy's youngest has the croup again," she explained. "Poor mite can't catch a break this winter. After breakfast, I'll need you to help prepare a chest rub." This was Annabelle's favorite part of her new life, learning the healing arts. Emmeline's knowledge seemed endless, passed down through generations of women who'd tended the sick before doctors were common in these parts. They were just finishing breakfast when they heard a wagon approaching. Annabelle glanced out the window, recognizing Carter's matched bays before she saw the man himself. Her pulse quickened slightly, though she told herself it was merely surprise at the early visit. "That'll be my supplies from town," Emmeline said, but there was a knowing glint in her eye. "Best go help him unload." Annabelle wrapped her shawl around her shoulders and stepped outside. Carter was already lifting crates from the wagon bed, his breath misting in the cold air. He looked up at her approach, touching his hat. "Miss Mayfield, how are you settling in?" "Very well, thank you. Mrs. Hartley is a good teacher." "And a tough one, I'd wager." He hefted a sack of flour. "Where does she want these?" "The pantry, through the kitchen." They worked in companionable silence. Carrying supplies into the house, Annabelle noticed Carter had included extras, an additional sack of sugar, more coffee than Emmeline had likely ordered, a small bag of peppermint sticks. "She didn't order those candies," Annabelle said, catching him adding them to the pantry shelf. "Must have been Morrison's mistake," he said with a perfectly straight face. "Of course." When the wagon was empty, Emmeline appeared with a cup of coffee for Carter. "Sit a spell," she commanded. "Tell me the town gossip." Carter sat at the kitchen table, his large frame making the chair look child-sized. "Not much to tell. Thomas Ranch lost some cattle to wolves. Reverend's wife is expecting again. And Clark Ridley's been telling anyone who'll listen about his narrow escape from a disfigured bride." Annabelle's hands stilled on the dish she was washing. She felt both sets of eyes on her but kept her gaze on the soapy water. "Man's a fool," Emmeline spat. "Always was. Remember when he courted the Sims girl, threw her over because her father's business failed?" "I remember." Carter said quietly. His voice carried an edge Annabelle hadn't heard before. Man judges everything by appearance, probably why his forge work is all show and no substance. How fortunate for Miss Sims, Annabelle said, her voice carefully neutral. Imagine being married to someone who abandons you at the first sign of trouble. She turned, meeting Carter's eyes. Something passed between them. Understanding, perhaps, or recognition. He looked away first, draining his coffee cup. I should go. Stock needs tending. He stood, then hesitated. There's a winter social at the church next Saturday. Music, dancing, potluck supper. The whole town usually attends. We know, Emmeline said dryly. Been going longer than you've been alive, boy. I was thinking, Carter continued, addressing Annabelle. You might want to go. Good way to meet folks. Let them see you're settling in. Annabelle's hand moved unconsciously to her scar. I'm not sure that's wise. Hiding won't change minds, Emmeline interjected. Best to face them down straight off. Show them you're not skulking in shame. Easy to say when you're not the one being stared at. Annabelle replied, more sharply than intended. Girl, I've been stared at plenty. Widow woman living alone, practicing medicine, speaking my mind. You think that doesn't draw looks? Difference is, I stopped caring what fools think about 40 years ago. Carter shifted his weight. I could escort you both. Might make it easier. The offer hung in the air. Annabelle knew what he was doing, offering his protection, his respectability, as a shield. Part of her rebelled at needing it. Another part, the practical part that had survived disappointment and rejection, recognized the wisdom. We'll see, she said finally. After Carter left, Annabelle threw herself into the day's work. She helped Emmeline prepare the chest rub for the Abernathy child, learning to blend eucalyptus oil with goose grease and camphor. They worked in the medicine garden, checking the cold frames, harvesting what winter greens they could. You're thinking too loud, Emmeline said as they worked. I'm not thinking anything. Lie to yourself if you must, but don't lie to me. You're thinking about that social and whether to hide here like a rabbit or face those hypocrites in town. Annabelle straightened, rubbing her back. What would you do? I told you, I'd march in there like I owned the place. But I'm old and ornery. You're young yet. Still care what people think. Shouldn't I? Emmeline studied a sprig of rosemary before answering. Caring what good people think keeps us civilized. Caring what fools think keeps us small. Trick is learning to tell the difference. That afternoon, they had their first visitor seeking Emmeline's healing skills, Mrs. Patterson arrived with her daughter Emma, a girl of perhaps 8 who coughed with a harsh barking sound that made Annabelle wince. Been like this for 3 days. Mrs. Patterson said, worry etched in every line of her face. Doctor's in Silver Creek until Tuesday, and she's getting worse. Emmeline examined the child with gentle hands, listening to her chest, feeling her throat, checking her fever. Emma stared at Annabelle throughout the examination, her eyes fixed on the scar. It looks like a lightning bolt, the girl said suddenly. Her mother gasped. Emma, mind your manners. It's all right, Annabelle said, kneeling to the child's level. I suppose it does look a bit like lightning. Does it hurt? Not anymore. How'd you get it? Emma, Mrs. Patterson was mortified. A fire, Annabelle said simply. I was helping someone get out of a burning house. Emma's eyes widened. Like a hero in a story. Heroes in stories don't usually end up with scars, Annabelle said wryly. The best ones do, Emma said with the certainty of childhood. They get marked by their adventures. Emmeline cleared her throat. Speaking of adventures, young lady, you're going to have one drinking my special tea. Annabelle, fetch the slippery elm and honey. They prepared the remedy together, Emmeline explaining each step. The tea would soothe Emma's throat while the chest rub would help her breathe. Simple remedies, but effective. You're good with children. Mrs. Patterson observed as Emma sipped her tea without complaint. Distracted by Annabelle's gentle conversation, "I helped raise my younger siblings." "Are you? That is, will you be staying in Edge Hollow?" The question carried weight beyond mere curiosity. Annabelle recognized it. The careful assessment of a mother determining if this scarred stranger was a suitable influence for her child. "I work for Mrs. Hartley now," she said evenly. "I have no plans to leave." Mrs. Patterson nodded slowly. "Good. It's good for Emma to see that people can overcome difficulties." After they left, medicine in hand, and Emma's cough already sounding less harsh, Emmeline fixed Annabelle with a knowing look. Still planning to hide from that social... Annabelle thought of Emma's matter-of-fact acceptance. Her mother's careful judgment turned to cautious approval. "I haven't decided." "Well, decide quick. If we're going, you'll need a dress. That traveling outfit won't do for dancing." "I don't dance." "Everyone dances, given the right partner." The week passed quickly, filled with the rhythm of daily chores and a steady stream of people seeking Emmeline's remedies. Annabelle met more of the townspeople, some kind, some wary, some openly curious about her scar. She learned to read the different reactions, to steel herself against the worst while appreciating the best. Carter stopped by twice more that week, always with legitimate errands, but lingering longer than necessary. He helped repair a broken gate, split wood for their stove, and somehow always managed to arrive just as Emmeline was serving coffee and fresh-baked goods. "That man's not subtle," Emmeline observed after his second visit. Good thing, too, subtle men are usually hiding something. Friday afternoon found Annabelle staring at her meager wardrobe, trying to convince herself she had nothing suitable for a social and therefore couldn't attend. Emmeline appeared in the doorway, arms full of fabric. "Thought so," the old woman said. "Lucky for you. I never throw anything away. This was my daughter's." She shook out a dress of deep blue wool, simple in cut but well made, with small silver buttons down the front and white lace at the collar and cuffs. It was beautiful in its simplicity, modest but not matronly. "I can't wear your daughter's dress," Annabelle protested. "Why not? It's doing no good in my trunk." Martha would have liked knowing it was being used again. Emmeline's voice was gruff, but her hands were gentle as she held the dress up to Annabelle. "Might need taking in at the waist, but the length is good. You're taller than she was." They spent the evening altering the dress, Emmeline sharing stories of her daughter as they worked. Martha had been spirited, independent, too quick to laugh and too slow to listen to warnings about swimming in the creek during spring runoff. "Fever took her, but water weakened her first," Emmeline said, her needle never pausing. "Always said I'd never regret her wild ways, just the shortness of time. Stand up. Let's see the hem." Annabelle stood, the blue wool falling in soft folds to her boots, in the lamplight, with Emmeline kneeling to check the hem. She felt a sudden wave of gratitude so strong it made her throat tight. "Thank you," she said softly. Emmeline looked up, understanding more than the simple words. "You're welcome, child. Now stop fidgeting or these stitches will be crooked." Saturday dawned clear and cold, the kind of brilliant winter day that made the mountains look like they'd been cut from blue paper against the sky. Annabelle went through her chores with nervous energy, second-guessing her decision to attend the social with every gathered egg and fed chicken. "You'll wear a groove in my floor with all that pacing," Emmeline said finally. "Go walk in the garden, check the cold frames. Do something useful with those nerves." Annabelle bundled up and went outside, grateful for the excuse. The medicine garden was peaceful under its blanket of snow, only the cold frames and protected beds showing green. She knelt to check the tender shoots of early herbs, her mind settling with the familiar work. Miss Mayfield. She looked up to find Carter standing at the garden gate, hat in hand despite the cold. He was dressed for town, clean shirt, dark vest, boots polished to a shine. He looked, she thought with a flutter in her stomach, quite handsome. "Mr. Rowe, you're early. Wanted to make sure you were still coming." He stepped into the garden, careful of the planted beds even under the snow. "I know it's not easy, facing all those people. Did you come all this way to talk me out of it?" "No." He moved closer, and she had to tilt her head back to see his face. "Came to tell you something. Clark Ridley plans to be there. He's been drinking all week, working up his courage or his cruelty. Might try to make a scene." Annabelle's chin came up. "Let him try." "That's what I figured you'd say." A smile ghosted across his features. "Just wanted you forewarned. I'll be there, and so will others who won't stand for foolishness. You're not facing this alone." "Why?" The question escaped before she could stop it. "Why do you care what happens to me?" Carter was quiet for a long moment, looking out over the snow-covered garden. "My sister Grace," he said finally. "She loved socials, loved to dance, but she'd stand by the wall all night because no one would ask her. I was too young and stupid to realize I could have danced with her myself, made sure she had at least one good memory of those nights." He looked back at Annabelle. "I can't fix what I didn't do then, but I can make sure you don't stand alone now, if you'll let me." "I'm not your sister, Mr. Rowe. You don't owe me anything." "No," he agreed. "You're not my sister, and what I owe isn't the point." They stood there in the winter garden, the unspoken hanging between them like morning mist. Finally, Annabelle broke the silence. "We should go inside. Emmeline will wonder what's keeping us." "Annabelle?" Her name on his lips stopped her. "You don't have to dance if you don't want to, but if you do want to, and you're just afraid of what people will think, well, courage isn't about not being afraid. It's about not letting fear make your choices for you." She thought about that as they walked back to the house, about courage and choices and the weight of other people's eyes. By the time they reached the kitchen door, she'd made her decision. She would go to the social, she would wear Martha's blue dress, and if anyone asked her to dance, even if that anyone had eyes like winter twilight and hands gentle enough to tame wild horses, she would say yes. Because Carter was right. Fear had made enough of her choices already. It was time to choose differently. The church hall glowed with warmth and lantern light as Carter helped Emmeline and Annabelle down from the wagon. Music drifted through the windows, fiddle and guitar and the rhythmic stomp of dancing feet. Annabelle's hand trembled slightly as she smoothed her blue dress, but she kept her chin high. "Remember," Emmeline said, adjusting her own best shawl, "you belong here as much as anyone, more than some." They entered together, Carter's solid presence at their backs. The hall was packed with what seemed like the entire population of Edge Hollow ranchers and townspeople, young couples and old-timers, children darting between adults' legs. The noise dipped for a moment as people noticed them, eyes inevitably finding Annabelle's scar. But then conversation resumed. "Let's find a place to sit," Carter suggested, guiding them to a bench along the wall where several older women had gathered. "Emmeline Hartley, as I live and breathe." One of them exclaimed, "And this must be your new helper we've been hearing about." Annabelle braced herself, but the woman's smile seemed genuine. "I'm Mrs. Morrison from the general store. My husband mentioned you'd come to town." "Pleased to meet you," Annabelle managed. "My Emma can't stop talking about the lady with the lightning scar who saved someone from a fire," another woman added. "Mrs. Patterson," Annabelle realized. "The mother of the sick child. She's told half her school about it, made you sound like something out of a fairy tale." Before Annabelle could respond, a commotion near the door drew everyone's attention. Clark Ridley had arrived, flanked by two companions who looked equally worse for drink. His eyes swept the room, landed on Annabelle, and narrowed. Carter shifted slightly, positioning himself between them. "Steady," he murmured. though whether to Annabel or himself, she couldn't tell. Clark started toward them, his gait unsteady but purposeful. The music faltered as people sensed trouble brewing, but before he could reach them, a small figure intercepted him. Reverend Williams, diminutive but commanding in his black coat. Mr. Ridley, the Reverend said pleasantly, though his voice carried, "How good of you to join us. I believe Mr. Henderson was just looking for a fourth for cards in the back room." "I'm not here for cards." Clark slurred, trying to peer around the minister. "No. Well then, perhaps you'd like to help with the punch table. We could use a strong back." I said, "Or," the Reverend continued, steel entering his voice, "perhaps you'd prefer to sleep it off in my study. Your choice, son, but you'll make it now." The hall held its breath. Clark looked around, perhaps realizing that the mood had shifted against him. Several men had stood up, ranchers and merchants alike, their faces set in disapproval. "Cards sound fine," he muttered finally, allowing himself to be led away. The Reverend caught Annabel's eye and nodded slightly before following Clark to ensure he made it to the back room. The music resumed, tentative at first, then with renewed vigor. "Well," Emmeline said dryly, "that's one snake defanged for the evening." Annabel's hands were shaking. She clasped them in her lap, trying to calm her racing heart. She'd been so ready to face him, to stand her ground, but the confrontation had been stolen from her. "You all right?" Carter asked quietly. "Yes, I expected a fight. Sometimes the best victories are the ones that don't happen." He paused, then stood. "Would you like some punch? I promise I won't let Clark near it." She managed a smile. That would be nice. While he was gone, Emma Patterson appeared, dragging a younger boy by the hand. "Miss Annabel, this is my brother Thomas. I told him about your scar." "Emma," her mother sighed, but Annabel waved her off. "Hello, Thomas. Are you enjoying the social—" The boy, perhaps 6, studied her with serious eyes. "Does it hurt?" "Not anymore. My PA has a scar on his arm from the war," he offered. "He says scars are just stories written on skin." "Your father sounds very wise." Carter returned with punch for all 3 women, then was promptly commandeered by Emma to admire her new hair ribbons. Annabel watched him crouch down to the child's level, giving the ribbons the serious attention Emma clearly felt they deserved. "He's good with children," Mrs. Patterson observed. "Shame he never married." "Mrs." Morrison added, with a significant look at Annabel. "Course, he's particular, not interested in silly girls or social climbers." Emmeline snorted. "Subtle as a stampede, aren't you, Sarah?" The evening progressed with surprising pleasantness. People approached their bench, some out of curiosity, others with genuine friendliness. Annabel met the schoolteacher, the banker's wife, several ranch families. Not everyone was welcoming, but enough were that she began to relax. Then the dancing began in earnest. The musicians struck up a lively reel, and couples flooded the floor. Annabel watched, trying not to notice how Carter remained by their bench instead of joining the dancers. Several young women cast hopeful glances his way, but he seemed oblivious. "Don't you dance, Mr. Rowe?" Emmeline asked innocently. "When the mood strikes," he replied. "And it hasn't struck in, 2 years or so." Carter gave her a look that would have quelled a lesser woman. Emmeline just smiled and turned to watch the dancers. 3 songs passed. Annabel told herself she was content to watch, to be accepted as a spectator if not a participant. Then the music changed to a slower waltz, and Carter stood. "Miss Mayfield," he said formally, extending his hand, "would you honor me with this dance?" The hall seemed to quiet again, though the music continued. Annabel felt every eye turned toward them. This was it, the moment of choice. She could refuse, stay safe on her bench, avoid the whispers and stares, or she placed her hand in his. "I would be honored. Mr. Rowe." He led her onto the floor with quiet confidence. Other couples made room, some watching openly, others pretending not to notice. Annabelle's heart hammered as Carter placed one hand at her waist, took her other hand in his. "I should warn you," she said as they began to move. "I'm not a very good dancer." "Neither am I," he admitted. "We'll muddle through together." And somehow, they did. Carter's lead was steady, if not fancy, and Annabelle found herself relaxing into the rhythm. The room blurred around them, curious faces, golden lamplight, the swirl of other dancers. All that mattered was the music and the warmth of Carter's hand at her waist. "People are staring," she murmured. "Let them—" He guided her through a turn. "Though I'd guess half are staring at me, wondering why Carter Rowe finally decided to dance. Why did you?" He was quiet for several beats. Seemed like the right partner finally showed up. Heat crept up her neck. "Mr. Rowe." "Carter," he corrected. "Think we know each other well enough by now." "Carter?" The name felt strange on her tongue. "Intimate. People will talk. People always talk. Question is whether we let their talk matter more than what we want." "And what do you want?" He met her eyes then, and something in his gaze made her breath catch. "Right now to finish this dance. Tomorrow to call on you proper, if you'll allow it. Beyond that," he spun her gently. "Well, beyond that depends on you." The waltz was ending. Annabelle knew she should step back, thank him politely, return to her bench. Instead, when the musicians immediately struck up another waltz, she stayed in his arms. "One more," she said softly. His smile was answer enough. They danced 3 dances in total before Annabelle's courage faltered and she pleaded tired feet. Carter escorted her back to Emmeline, who looked entirely too pleased with herself. "About time," the old woman muttered. "Thought I'd be dust before either of you made a move." The rest of the evening passed in a blur. There was food tables groaning with potluck offerings. Annabelle contributed to serving, finding it easier to face people with a useful task in hand. She noticed Clark had disappeared from the card room, hopefully gone home to sleep off his drunk. As the evening wound down, families beginning to gather sleepy children and wraps, Reverend Williams approached their group. "Miss Mayfield," he said warmly, "I'm so pleased you joined us tonight. I hope we'll see you at services tomorrow."
Yes, of course."
"Excellent. And may I say, it's good to see new faces in our community, especially those who come with such recommendations." He glanced at Emmeline. "Mrs. Hartley speaks highly of your character and work ethic."
"You old gossip," Emmeline accused without heat. "What have I been saying now?"
"Only that your new helper has made your life considerably easier and your chickens considerably happier." The Reverend's eyes twinkled. "High praise indeed from you, Emmeline." After he moved on, Annabelle turned to her employer. "You've been talking about me." "Course I have. Think I'd let folks form opinions based on Clark Ridley's poison. Better they hear the truth from me." The social was ending, people bundling into coats and cloaks, calling goodbyes. Carter helped them gather their things, then went to bring the wagon around. While they waited, Sarah Morrison approached once more. "It was lovely to meet you properly, Miss Mayfield," she said. "I do hope you'll stop by the store soon. I'd love to show you our new fabric selections." "That's kind of you, Mrs. Morrison." The woman leaned closer, lowering her voice. "Clark Ridley is a fool. Dear, but then, we've all known that for years. His loss is clearly Edge Hollow's gain." Outside, the night was crystal clear, stars brilliant in the black sky. Carter helped them into the wagon, handling Emmeline's slight weight as carefully as he did Annabelle. The ride home was quiet, each lost in their own thoughts. At the Hartley place, Carter helped them down, then lingered by the wagon.
"Thank you for dancing with me,"
he said to Annabelle.
"Thank you for asking."
"I meant what I said, about calling on you proper." Annabelle glanced at Emmeline, who was pretending to be very interested in finding her house key.
Yes, I'd like that.
Tomorrow after church. Tomorrow. He touched his hat, climbed back into the wagon. They watched his lanterns disappear down the road before going inside.
"Well,"
Emmeline said, hanging up her shawl,
"that went better than expected."
"You expected Clark to cause a scene. I expected you to hide in a corner all night. Instead, you danced 3 times. With the most eligible bachelor in the territory." He was being kind. Emmeline fixed her with a look that could strip paint.
"Girl,
Carter Rowe hasn't danced at a social since his brother died. That wasn't kindness. That was courtship." Annabelle felt heat flood her face.
"It's too soon. I barely know him."
"You know he's decent, hard-working, gentle with those weaker than himself, faithful to his word." Emmeline moved toward her bedroom. That's more than most women know about their husbands after 20 years. Alone in her room, Annabelle sat at the window, brushing out her hair. The night was still, peaceful, the mountains' dark shapes against the stars. She thought about the evening, the acceptance she'd found, the poison she'd avoided, the dances that still made her feet feel light. Mostly, she thought about Carter, the steadiness of his presence, the warmth of his hand at her waist, the way he'd said her name like it was something precious. She touched her scar, the familiar ridge beneath her fingers. For the first time in years, she'd forgotten about it for whole minutes at a time, dancing in Carter's arms, serving food beside the other women, laughing at Emma's chatter. She'd been just Annabelle, not the scarred woman, the rejected bride, the object of pity or curiosity. Tomorrow he would come calling. Tomorrow they would sit in Emmeline's parlor and talk properly, carefully, within the bounds of propriety. But tonight she had danced, and that was enough. No, it was more than enough. It was everything. The storm arrived 3 weeks after the social, sweeping down from the mountains with a fury that turned the world white. Annabelle woke to howling wind and snow so thick she couldn't see the chicken coop from her window. Emmeline was already up, stoking the fire and checking their supplies. "This one's going to be bad," the old woman said grimly. "Feel it in my bones. We'd best get the animals secured." They worked through the morning, fighting wind that tried to tear the breath from their lungs. Annabelle hauled extra feed to the chicken coop, secured loose boards, and helped Emmeline bring in enough firewood to last several days. By noon, the storm had worsened to a blizzard. "No one will be traveling in this," Emmeline said, peering out the kitchen window at the wall of white. "Hope Carter got his stock to shelter in time." Annabelle had been trying not to think about Carter, alone at his ranch in this weather. He'd called on her every Sunday since the social, their careful courtship progressing in Emmeline's parlor under the old woman's amused eye. Last week, he'd brought her a book of poetry, admitting sheepishly that he'd ordered it from Denver.
"He's weathered worse,"
Annabelle said, but worry gnawed at her. By evening, the storm had become a monster. The little house creaked and groaned under the assault, windows rattling in their frames. They ate a cold supper, not wanting to waste wood on cooking, and were preparing for an early bed when they heard it, a faint pounding on the door. Annabelle's heart leaped. She rushed to open it, fighting against the wind. Carter stumbled inside, more ice than man, dragging something behind him. "Found him on the road," he gasped through frozen lips. "Horse through him!" The bundle resolved into a person, a young man, unconscious, blood dark on his temple. Together, they hauled him to the kitchen, laying him near the stove. "Get blankets," Emmeline ordered, immediately in her element. "Carter, stop standing there dripping. You'll catch your death." While Emmeline tended the injured man, Annabelle helped Carter out of his frozen coat. His hands were white with cold, fumbling with buttons, without thinking. She took over, unbuttoning his vest, unlacing his boots. "What were you doing out in this?" she scolded, fear making her voice sharp. Checking the north pasture fence, saw him go past, riding hell-bent in the storm. When he didn't come back, I followed. He winced as feeling returned to his fingers. "Couldn't leave him to freeze." "You could have frozen yourself." "But I didn't." He caught her hands, stilling their fussy movements. "I'm all right. Annabelle." The use of her first name, here in crisis instead of informal courtship, made something shift between them. She met his eyes, saw her own fear reflected there. "Don't you dare do something that foolish again," she whispered. "Can't promise that." His thumb brushed over her knuckles. "Not if someone needs help." Stubborn man. Determined woman. Emmeline's sharp voice broke the moment. "If you two are done making calf eyes, I could use help here." The young man, barely more than a boy, really had regained consciousness. He was trying to sit up, eyes wild with panic. "Easy, son," Carter said, moving to kneel beside him. "You're safe. You took a fall from your horse." Have to get through." The boy's voice was hoarse. "My sister. The baby's coming early and Ma sent me for the doctor." Annabelle met Emmeline's eyes. They both knew what this meant. No doctor could travel in this storm, and a baby coming early in these conditions. "Where's your family's place?" Emmeline asked. "The Baxter claim, 5 miles north, up Willow Creek Canyon." Carter shook his head. "Can't make it tonight. Storm's too bad." "But my sister," the boy tried to stand, swayed dangerously. "Your sister needs you alive, not frozen in a drift," Emmeline said firmly. "Soon as the storm breaks, we'll go. For now, you rest." They settled the boy, Tom Baxter, he finally told them, on a pallet near the stove. Carter stayed too, the storm too dangerous for him to attempt the mile to his own ranch. Annabelle made coffee, strong and black, while they waited for dawn. "Have you delivered babies?" she asked Emmeline quietly. "More than I can count, but early babies in winter." The old woman shook her head. "They'll need all the help they can get." The storm raged through the night. Annabelle dozed fitfully in a chair, waking often to tend the fire or check on Tom. Once she woke to find Carter watching her from across the room, his expression unreadable in the flickering light. Dawn came gray and bitter, but the wind had died to merely brutal instead of deadly. Carter stood, testing the weather at the door. "We can make it if we're careful," he declared. "I'll get my team in the big sled." "I'm coming," Annabelle said. "No." His response was immediate. "Too dangerous." "Emmeline will need help. You know she will." Annabelle lifted her chin. "I've assisted with births before." "Not in a blizzard." "Carter Rowe." She stepped close, lowering her voice. "You just risked your life for a stranger. Don't you dare tell me I can't do the same." They stared at each other, wills clashing. "Finally." Carter sighed. "Stubborn woman," he muttered, but there was admiration in it. Within an hour, they were ready. Carter had retrieved his heavy sled and strongest team. They bundled Emmeline's supplies, herbs, tools, clean linens, and wrapped themselves in every warm thing they could find. Tom, still weak but determined, huddled in the sled bed. The journey was a nightmare of white, wind-driven snow stung exposed skin like needles. The horses struggled, breath steaming, as Carter guided them by instinct more than sight. Annabelle pressed close to Emmeline, trying to shelter the older woman. 5 miles had never seemed so far. Finally, through the white came a dark shape, a cabin, smoke barely visible from its chimney. Dogs barked, announcing their arrival, and the door flew open. "Tom, thank God," a woman rushed out, heavily pregnant herself. "Is that the doctor?"
"No doctor could come,"
Emmeline said, climbing down with Annabelle's help.
"but I'm a midwife. Where's the girl?"
Inside, they found barely controlled chaos. The cabin was small, crowded with children ranging from toddlers to teenagers. In the back room, a young woman, barely 18, labored on a narrow bed, her face white with pain and fear. "How long?" Emmeline asked, immediately taking charge.
"Since yesterday morning,"
the mother said.
"The pains are close, but nothing's happening."
Emmeline's examination was swift and gentle. Her face, when she straightened, was carefully neutral. "Baby's turned wrong. We'll need to help it along." The next hours blurred together. Annabelle boiled water, tore linens for bandages, held the girl's hand through contractions that seemed to tear her apart. Emmeline worked with steady hands and calm voice, but Annabelle could see the worry in her eyes. Carter had taken charge of the children and animals, his quiet presence calming the chaos. Once, when Annabelle emerged for fresh water, she found him teaching the younger boys to whittle, keeping their minds off their sister's screams. "How is she?" he asked quietly.
"Emmeline's doing everything she can."
Annabelle's voice cracked.
"She's so young. Carter, so frightened."
He caught her hand, squeezed gently.
"You're doing good. She's lucky to have you there."
Night fell again. The storm had passed, leaving brutal cold in its wake. Inside the cabin, the battle continued. The girl, Mary was her name, was exhausted, each contraction weaker than the last. "We're losing them," Emmeline murmured to Annabelle. "Both of them."
"No."
Annabelle looked at Mary's face.
"So young, so desperate. There has to be something."
"Sometimes there isn't. Sometimes—" Emmeline stopped, tilting her head. "Unless—" She moved with sudden purpose, hands positioned differently. "One more push. Mary, just one more, hard as you can."
"I can't."
"You can." Annabelle gripped the girl's hands.
"You're strong. You're brave. One more push for your baby."
Mary screamed, bearing down with the last of her strength. For a moment, nothing. Then Emmeline's hands moved surely, and suddenly there was a different cry, thin, weak, but unmistakably alive. "It's a girl," Emmeline said, working quickly to clear the baby's airways. "Small, but breathing." The baby was tiny, fitting in Emmeline's two hands, but she was pink, squirming, announcing her displeasure at the cold world. Annabelle wrapped her in warmed blankets while Emmeline tended to Mary. "Let me see her," Mary whispered. Annabelle placed the baby on her mother's chest. The infant immediately quieted, as if recognizing safety. Mary's face transformed with wonder and fierce love.
"She's perfect," she breathed. "She's early,"
Emmeline warned.
"She'll need careful watching. Keep her warm, fed often, skin to skin as much as possible."
They stayed through the rest of the night, ensuring both mother and baby were stable. By morning, the little one was nursing weakly but steadily, and Mary had color back in her cheeks. "We owe you everything," Mrs. Baxter said, tears running down her weathered face.
"I thought we'd lose them both." "Thank your son,"
Emmeline said.
"He risked his life to get help."
Tom, still pale but proud, ducked his head at the praise. The journey home was easier, the storm spent and the sun brilliant on fresh snow. Carter drove while Annabelle and Emmeline huddled together, exhausted but triumphant. "You did well," Emmeline said quietly. "Kept that girl fighting when she wanted to give up. I just held her hand. Sometimes that's everything." The old woman studied her. "You have the makings of a midwife, if you wanted to learn." Annabelle thought of Mary's face when she held her daughter, of the miracle of life snatched from winter's grip. "I'd like that." They were nearly home when Carter spoke. "What you did back there, Mary and the baby—" "Emmeline did the work."
Emmeline did the medicine. You gave them hope. That matters.
He glanced back at her. You matter. The words hung in the cold air, warming something deep in Annabelle's chest. She met his eyes, saw in them something that made her breath catch. Carter. When we get back, he said, turning to face the road again. After you've rested. We need to talk. Proper talk. About the future. Annabelle's hand found Emmeline's, seeking anchor. The old woman squeezed back, a smile playing at her lips. About time, she muttered, just loud enough for Annabelle to hear. As they crested the final hill, home coming into view, Annabelle thought about the night past, about life and death and the thin line between them, about courage found in crisis and bonds forged in storm. She thought about Carter's words. You matter. Such simple words, but they lodged in her heart like spring seeds, ready to grow into something beautiful. The future stretched before them, uncertain as mountain weather. But for now, they were alive. They were safe, and somewhere in a cabin 5 miles north. A baby girl breathed because they had been brave enough to venture into the storm. It was enough. More than enough. It was everything. The talk of scandal started at Morrison's general store on a Tuesday morning. Annabelle had gone to town for supplies, her basket already half full with flour and coffee, when she heard the whispers behind the fabric bolts. Spent the whole night there, just the two of them. Mrs. Clarence hissed to her companion. In that barn during the storm.
Emmeline was there too,
the other woman protested weakly. Sleeping, no doubt, while those two... The implication hung heavy in the air. Annabelle's hand stilled on the bolt of calico she'd been examining. The storm had been 2 weeks ago. She'd thought the story of baby Mary's birth would be what people remembered, not the logistics of shelter during a blizzard.
Can I help you with that fabric? Miss Mayfield?
Sarah Morrison appeared at her elbow, voice carefully neutral. But Annabelle saw the question in her eyes, the careful assessment of a shopkeeper who couldn't afford to take sides too openly. Just looking. Thank you, Annabelle replied, proud that her voice remained steady. She finished her shopping quickly, aware of eyes following her movement through the store.
At the counter, Mr.
Morrison tallied her purchases without meeting her gaze, though he'd always been friendly before. Outside, the March sun was bright but without warmth. Annabelle loaded her purchases into the wagon, hands trembling slightly. She'd been naive to think acceptance at one social meant the town had fully embraced her. All it took was one whisper of impropriety. Miss Mayfield. She turned to find Clark Ridley lounging against the store's hitching post, a satisfied smirk playing at his lips. He looked better than he had at the social cleaner, sober, but with the same cruel glint in his eyes. Mr. Ridley. She moved to climb into the wagon, but he stepped closer. Heard you've been keeping Carter Row warm at night. Smart move. He's got a good spread, steady income, better than a blacksmith anyway. Heat flooded her cheeks.
How dare you?
Just saying what everyone's thinking. He examined his fingernails with feigned casualness. Course, a man like Carter might enjoy damaged goods for a while, but when it comes to marriage, he'll want someone, unspoiled, someone who doesn't throw herself at the first man to show interest.
You know nothing about?
I know you spent the night in his barn, unchaperoned. They're saying, though I tried to tell them. He leaned closer, voice dropping. A woman who'd travel across 3 territories to marry a stranger is capable of anything. Annabelle's hand itched to slap him, but she clenched it in her skirts instead. Violence would only feed the gossip. What do you want? Clark. Me, nothing. Just thought you should know what people are saying. Thought you might want to consider leaving Edge Hollow before things get unpleasant. I'd even pay your train fare. Call it a late wedding gift. The only gift you could give me is your absence. Annabelle said coldly, Good day, mister. Ridley. She climbed into the wagon with as much dignity as she could muster, aware of faces watching from store windows. The drive back to Emmeline's felt endless, each person she passed seeming to stare with knowing eyes. Emmeline took one look at her face when she entered and set down her mending. "What happened?" Annabel told her, words tumbling out with hurt and anger. The old woman listened, her expression growing stonier with each detail.
"Fools,"
she spat when Annabel finished.
"Hypocritical fools. Half the marriages in this town started with less propriety than you've shown."
"But the talk will die down when the next scandal comes along. Or," Emmeline's eyes sharpened, "when people have something bigger to focus on." Before Annabel could ask what she meant, hoofbeats sounded in the yard. Through the window, she saw Carter dismounting, his face set in hard lines. He'd heard then. He entered without knocking, crossing straight to Annabel.
"Are you all right?"
"I'm fine." The lie came automatically. "You're not?" He took her hands, studying her face. "I just came from town. Jim Morrison told me what happened. What Clark said."
"It doesn't matter."
"It does." His grip tightened. "I won't have you slandered because you helped save a life, because you stayed in my barn during a killing storm. What can you do? Force people to stop talking?" Carter was quiet for a moment, then seemed to come to a decision. He released her hands, turning to Emmeline. "Ma'am, I need to speak with Annabel. Privately." Emmeline looked between them, then nodded slowly. "I'll be in the garden. Got early peas to check." She left, pulling the door firmly behind her. Carter waited until her footsteps faded, then faced Annabel again.
"This isn't how I planned to do this."
"Do what?" Instead of answering, he reached into his vest pocket, pulling out a small leather box. Annabel's breath caught as he opened it, revealing a simple gold ring with a small blue stone. "It was my mother's," he said quietly. "She gave it to me before she died, told me to give it to the woman I wanted to build a life with." "Carter, let me finish." He took a breath, seemingly gathering courage. "I've been courting you proper for weeks, trying to do this right. Planned to wait until spring was fuller, until you'd had more time to know your own mind. But if waiting means you suffer for gossip, then I'm done waiting." He dropped to one knee, there in Emmeline's kitchen, still holding the ring. "Annabel Mayfield, will you marry me?" The world seemed to stop. Annabel stared at him, this good man offering his name as shield against cruel tongues. You can't propose just to stop gossip." "I'm not." His eyes never left hers. "I'm proposing because I love you. Because I've loved you since I found you behind that depot. Too proud to take charity, but too smart to freeze. Because you dance when you're scared and hold dying girls' hands and treat my sister's memory with kindness. But my scar is part of you, like my brother's death is part of me. We're all marked. Annabel, yours just shows on the outside." Tears blurred her vision. "People will say I trapped you, that you married me out of obligation. Then they're fools who don't know me." He stood, moving closer. "I'm not Clark Ridley. Annabel, I don't make promises lightly, and I don't run when things get difficult. If you'll have me, I'll spend my life proving that." She thought of all the reasons to say no, too soon, too much talk, too much risk. Then she thought of his steady presence through these weeks, his quiet courtship, the way he looked at her like she was whole and precious.
"Yes,"
she whispered. His face transformed with joy.
"Yes."
"Yes, Carter Rowe, I'll marry you." His hands shook slightly as he slipped the ring onto her finger. The blue stone caught the light, winking like a promise. Then he cupped her face gently, thumbs brushing away her tears. "Can I kiss you?" he asked softly. She nodded, not trusting her voice. His lips touched hers, gentle and reverent, a pledge sealed with tenderness. When they parted, both were breathless. When? She asked. Tomorrow, if you'd let me, but I figure you'll want something more proper.
This Sunday, she decided. After church, let them all see we're not ashamed.
You sure that's only 5 days? I'm sure. She touched the ring, marveling at its weight. But Carter, where will we live? I can't leave Emmeline without help.
Already thought of that. A smile played at his lips. There's a foreman's cabin on my property, sitting empty, close enough to the main house for propriety, far enough for privacy.
Emmeline could move in if she wanted. You could still help her. And she'd be closer to town for her patients. You've been planning this.
For weeks,
he admitted. Just didn't expect to need it so soon. The door opened, and Emmeline entered with suspicious timing. Well, do I need to find a new helper or a wedding dress?
A dress,
Annabelle said, holding up her hand to show the ring. Emmeline's face cracked into a rare, full smile. About damn time, Sunday.
Sunday. Then we'd best get to work. Can't have my girl married in that traveling dress.
The next days passed in a whirlwind. News of the engagement spread through Edge Hollow like wildfire, effectively smothering the previous gossip. Some still whispered about the speed, but many more seemed genuinely pleased. Mrs. Patterson was among the first to call, bringing her daughter Emma. A spring wedding, how romantic. Emma, show Miss Mayfield what you made. The girl shyly produced a small sampler, crooked letters spelling out happiness with flowers around the border. For your new home, she said.
It's beautiful,
Annabelle said, touched. I'll hang it in my kitchen. More visitors came, ranch wives with recipes and advice, young women eager to hear about the proposal. Even some of the men stopping Carter in town to offer congratulations. Not everyone was kind, but enough were that the cruel voices seemed smaller. Clark Ridley made one last attempt, cornering Annabelle outside the church on Thursday. He's marrying you out of pity, he said baldly. Everyone knows it. Do they? Annabelle lifted her chin. Because what I know is that Carter Rowe is a man of honor, while you're a man who abandons women at train stations. I know which one I'd rather have. His face flushed ugly red, but before he could respond, Carter appeared. Problem here, his voice was mild, but his stance suggested violence barely leashed. Clark looked between them, perhaps seeing his defeat in their united front. No problem, just wishing your bride luck. She'll need it. After he slunk away, Carter touched Annabelle's arm. You all right? Perfect, she said, meaning it. He has no power over me anymore. Sunday dawned clear and bright, the first truly warm day of spring. Annabelle stood in her room at Emmeline's, wearing the blue dress from the social with new white lace at the collar and cuffs. Emmeline had woven early wildflowers into her hair. You're beautiful, the old woman said gruffly.
That man's lucky to have you. I'm lucky too, Annabelle said. For him, for you, for all of this. 6 weeks ago, I had nothing.
You had yourself. That's always been enough. Emmeline adjusted a flower. Now stop making me emotional. I'm too old for tears. The church was fuller than usual, curiosity bringing out even irregular attendees. Annabelle entered on Emmeline's arm, aware of all eyes on her, but focusing only on the man waiting at the altar. Carter stood tall and solemn in his best suit, but his face lit up when he saw her. Reverend Williams smiled as she reached the front, taking her place beside her soon-to-be husband. Dearly beloved, the Reverend began, we gather today to witness something precious. 2 lives joining as one. 2 souls choosing to face whatever comes together rather than alone. The ceremony was simple but heartfelt. When Carter spoke his vows, his voice was strong and sure. When Annabelle spoke hers, she felt the truth of them in her bones. I now pronounce you husband and wife, Reverend Williams declared. You may kiss your bride. This kiss was different from their first, still tender but with a promise of passion carefully banked. The congregation erupted in applause, and Annabel realized with surprise that most seemed genuinely happy for them. At the church social that followed, she danced every dance with her new husband, aware of but uncaring about watching eyes. Let them look. Let them see that sometimes love came quickly, unexpectedly, born from kindness in a snowstorm. Happy, Carter asked during a slower waltz. Completely. She touched the scar on her neck. Then his face. Thank you for seeing me, really seeing me. Thank you for letting yourself be seen. He spun her gently. Ready to go home. Home, their home, together. Yes. As they prepared to leave, Clark Ridley appeared one last time, drunk despite the early hour. To the happy couple, he slurred, raising a flask mockingly. May you get what you deserve. We already have, Carter said quietly. Each other. They left him standing there, swaying and bitter, while they walked into their future together. Behind them, the church bells rang out over Edge Hollow, announcing new beginnings, while ahead, the mountains stood eternal, witness to another love story written in their shadow. Annabel Rowe, for that was her name now, squeezed her husband's hand as he helped her into the wagon. Tomorrow there would be work, adjustment, the building of a life together. But tonight, there was just them, and the promise of all the tomorrows to come. The scar on her neck caught the late afternoon sun as they drove away. But for once, she didn't notice. She was too busy looking forward, toward home, toward hope, toward a future where marks didn't define you. Love did. Spring settled fully over Edge Hollow, bringing with it new life and new possibilities. Annabel had been married for 3 weeks now, settling into the rhythm of being Mrs. Carter Rowe. The foreman's cabin had become a cozy home, and Emmeline had indeed moved into it, grumbling all the while about foolish young people, even as her eyes twinkled with pleasure at being closer to town. This morning, Annabel stood at the table in the main house, carefully cutting fabric for a new dress. The kitchen had become her workroom during the days when Carter was out with the cattle. She'd discovered an old sewing machine in the attic, and after some oil and attention, it hummed along beautifully. That's fine work, Emmeline observed from her chair by the window, sorting dried herbs. Straighter seams than I've seen from the seamstress in Silver Creek. My mother taught me, Annabel said, guiding the fabric through the machine. She always said neat stitches were the mark of a careful mind. Through the window, she could see the orphanage wagon approaching, once a month. Sister Catherine brought children from the Good Shepherd home to town for supplies and treats. Annabel had met her at church, a formidable woman who ran the orphanage with equal parts discipline and love. The wagon stopped in the yard, and Annabel heard children's voices. She set aside her sewing and went to the door, Emmeline following more slowly. Mrs. Rowe. Sister Catherine called out cheerfully. I hope we're not imposing. Young Lucy here has been talking about nothing but meeting the lady who makes such pretty dresses. A girl of perhaps 10 hung back behind the nun, thin and pale with huge dark eyes. Her dress was clean but threadbare, clearly handed down multiple times, hanging loose on her small frame. No imposition at all, Annabel said warmly. Would you like to come in? I just made fresh cookies. The children, 5 of them ranging from 6 to 12, filed in quietly, eyes wide at the homey kitchen. Lucy stayed close to Sister Catherine, though her gaze kept returning to the partly finished dress on the table. That's beautiful, she whispered. Would you like to see it closer? Annabel asked gently. Lucy nodded, approaching the table like it held something sacred. Her fingers hovered over the fabric, not quite touching. Do you like to sew? Annabel asked. I don't know how, Lucy admitted, but I watch Sister Margaret sometimes. She says I'm too young, that I'd prick myself. Nonsense. Emmeline interjected. I was threading needles at 6. Girls never too young to learn something useful.
An idea formed in Annabelle's mind. Sister Catherine, how often do the children need new clothes? The nun sighed. Always. They grow so fast, and hand-me-downs only last so long. We make do, but— She gestured at Lucy's ill-fitting dress. What if I taught some of the older girls to sew? They could help make clothes for the younger ones, and it's a skill they could use later. Sister Catherine's face lit up. That would be a blessing, but when would you have time? Thursday afternoons. Annabelle looked at Emmeline, who nodded. I could teach basic mending first, then move to simple garments. Me too, Lucy asked hopefully. Especially you. Annabelle promised. After cookies and milk, the orphanage group departed, but not before Lucy hugged Annabelle tightly. Thank you, she whispered. No one ever wanted to teach me anything special before. That evening, as Annabelle told Carter about her plan over dinner, he smiled. You've got a good heart. Wife. It's practical too, she insisted. Those girls need skills for when they leave the orphanage, and the younger children need clothes that fit. I'm not arguing. He reached across the table to take her hand. I'm proud of you. Thursday came quickly. Annabelle had prepared simple projects, handkerchiefs to hem, buttons to sew on, basic patches. 4 girls arrived with Sister Catherine Lucy, of course, plus Ruth 12, Margaret 11, and little Sarah 8. First rule of sewing. Annabelle began, showing them how to thread a needle. Is patience. Rushed stitches are sloppy stitches. Lucy proved to have naturally steady hands, her first line of stitching remarkably straight for a beginner. Ruth struggled more, frustrated when her thread tangled, but Margaret helped her patiently. Little Sarah mainly watched, designated as the pin holder to keep her involved. My mama sewed, Ruth said suddenly as they worked. Before she died, I remember watching her make a quilt. Mine too, Margaret added softly. She made beautiful things. Annabelle's heart ached for these motherless girls, learning skills their mothers should have taught them. Then we're honoring their memory by learning, she said gently. Every stitch connects us to the women who came before. As the weeks passed, Thursday afternoons became a highlight. The girls progressed from simple tasks to actual garments. First a basic apron for Sarah, then a new dress for Lucy from fabric Annabelle had bought in town. The day Lucy tried on her finished dress, she stood before the mirror in wonder. The simple blue calico fit perfectly, with even seams and a small bit of white trim at the collar. I look, she trailed off, touching the fabric reverently. You look like a young lady who made her own dress, Emmeline said from her corner, where she supervised and offered tart wisdom. Nothing finer than wearing something you created yourself. Word spread about Annabelle's sewing lessons. Mrs. Morrison donated fabric remnants. Other women brought buttons, thread, trim they no longer needed. Even some of the ranch wives, initially cool toward Annabelle after her hasty marriage, began to warm up. It's good what you're doing for those girls. Mrs. Henderson said after church one Sunday, practical charity, not just handouts. But not everyone approved. Clark Ridley, still bitter, made his opinion known at the saloon, his words inevitably reaching Annabelle. Playing Lady Bountiful now. He'd sneered, trying to make folks forget she trapped poor Roe into marriage. Carter had wanted to confront him, but Annabelle held him back. His words can't hurt me, she said. Not when I see Lucy's face in her new dress, or watch Ruth master a difficult stitch. That matters. He doesn't. One Thursday in late May, the girls arrived excited about the upcoming Founders' Day celebration. The orphanage children would sing in the program, but their performance clothes were shabby. We'll look so plain next to the town children, Ruth said sadly. Everyone will know we're orphans. Annabelle exchanged glances with Emmeline. What if you didn't look plain? What if we made matching pinafores for all the orphanage girls, something special just for the performance? Could we really? Lucy breathed. We'd need help, Annabelle mused. It's 15 girls total, isn't it?
That's a lot of sewing in 3 weeks.
I could help,
a voice said from the doorway. Mrs. Patterson stood there with Emma, who'd been playing with the younger orphans outside. I'm fair with a needle, and I've got time.
Me too, said another voice. Mrs. Baxter,
the mother they'd helped in the storm, had arrived to pick up medicine from Emmeline.
Mary's doing well. Thanks to you both,
I'd be honored to help. And so it began. What started as Annabelle's simple sewing lessons became a community project. Women gathered at the row house in the afternoons, cutting white cotton, sewing pinafores, adding small touches of embroidery. Even some who'd initially gossiped about Annabelle found themselves working beside her, united in the goal of giving orphan children dignity. Lucy and the older girls helped too, proud to be making their own performance clothes. Under supervision, they cut straight lines, sewed simple seams, pressed finished pieces.
Look,
Lucy said one afternoon, holding up a completed pinafore. I made this whole part myself.
You did indeed,
Annabelle confirmed.
Every stitch perfect.
Clark made one attempt to spoil things, stopping Annabelle on the street when she was in town for supplies. Quite the lady of charity, he said mockingly. Must be nice, spending your husband's money on orphans, playing house with other people's cast-off children since you'll likely never have your own. The word stung. She and Carter had only been married 2 months, far too soon for such concerns, but the cruelty was intentional. Before she could respond, Lucy appeared from behind the wagon where she'd been helping load packages.
Hey, Mrs. Rowe will have beautiful babies, the girl said firmly. And they'll be lucky, because she'll teach them to make things and be kind and not say mean things to people.
Clark's face reddened as several passers-by chuckled. He stalked off without another word, leaving Annabelle fighting between tears and laughter. Thank you, dear one, she said to Lucy. He's just mad because you picked Mr. Carter instead of him, Lucy said with a child's clear sight. Sister Catherine says jealous people say the meanest things. The day of Founders' Day dawned bright and clear. The orphanage girls looked transformed in their white pinafores over their everyday dresses, each one embroidered with a small flower on the pocket. Roses for the older girls, daisies for the younger ones. We match, little Sarah exclaimed, spinning to make her pinafore flare out.
We all match like real sisters.
The performance was held in the town square, when the orphanage children took the stage. Annabelle heard the murmur of surprise from the crowd. The girls stood straighter, sang louder, pride evident in every line of their bodies. After the program, people approached Annabelle. Orders for dresses, requests for mending, questions about commissioning special pieces. Without meaning to, she'd established herself as Edge Hollow's seamstress.
I'll need a proper workspace,
she told Carter that night as they sat on their porch, watching the sunset.
Can't take over your kitchen forever.
Already been thinking on that, he said. What about converting part of the old summer kitchen? It's got good light, plenty of space. You wouldn't mind. He pulled her closer. Annabelle, you've brought more life to this ranch in 2 months than I managed in 8 years. Convert whatever you like. Lucy and the girls continued their Thursday lessons, now assisted by their new skills in actual orders. The older girls learned to take measurements, calculate fabric needs, keep account books. It was training for real employment, a future beyond the orphanage. One afternoon, as they worked on a christening gown for the banker's new granddaughter, Lucy said quietly, I used to dream someone would adopt me, give me a real home. The other girls nodded, that universal orphan wish hanging in the air.
But now,
Lucy continued, I think maybe it's okay if no one does, because I'm learning to make my own way, like you did, Mrs. Rowe. Annabelle's throat tightened. You're all going to make your own way brilliantly. Even with no families? Ruth asked. Families come in all forms, Emmeline interjected from her corner. Blood's just one kind. There's the family you choose, the family that chooses you, the family you build with your own hands. You girls are building something here. Don't discount that." As spring turned toward summer, Annabelle reflected on how much had changed. The scared woman at the train depot seemed like someone from another life. Now she had a husband who loved her, a home, a thriving business, and these girls who looked at her like she hung the moon. Her fingers found the scar on her neck, that mark that had defined so much of her life. It was still there, would always be there. But now it was just one part of her story, not the whole of it. Mrs. Rowe. Lucy stood beside her chair, holding out a small embroidered handkerchief. "I made this for you, to say thank you." The stitching was careful, spelling out a row with small flowers around it. It wasn't perfect. One flower was lopsided, the R slightly crooked, but it was beautiful in its imperfection. "It's wonderful," Annabelle said, blinking back tears. "I'll treasure it always." Lucy beamed, then returned to her work, helping Sarah thread her needle. Around them, the other girls chattered and sewed, creating beauty from simple cloth and thread. This was her family, too, Annabelle realized. These girls who came every Thursday, eager to learn, to create, to become more than what the world expected of orphans. She'd thought she was teaching them to sew, but they'd taught her something far greater. That purpose could be found in the smallest acts of kindness. That community could be built one stitch at a time. Outside, Carter's whistle announced his return from the range. Soon he'd join them for supper, teasing the girls, praising their work, making each one feel special. Later, after Sister Catherine collected her charges, he and Annabelle would sit together, planning the workshop renovation, dreaming of the future. But for now, there was this sunlight through clean windows, the hum of busy voices, the satisfaction of creation, and the knowledge that she'd found her place at last. Not despite her scars, but because of everything they'd taught her about survival, about compassion, about the beauty of imperfect things made whole by love. The needle flashed in her hands, sure and steady, stitching hope into every seam. Christmas approached Edge Hollow with a vengeance that year, bringing early snows and bitter winds that rattled windows and tested the chinking between logs. Annabelle stood in her workshop, the converted summer kitchen Carter had renovated for her, carefully pressing the final seam on a deep green velvet dress. "That's exquisite work," Emmeline observed from her chair near the stove. The old woman spent most afternoons here now, claiming the workshop was warmer than the cabin, though Annabelle suspected she simply enjoyed the company. "A Mrs. Henderson ordered it for the Christmas Eve service," Annabelle said, holding up the dress to inspect it. "She specifically requested something that would, in her words, make that uppity Mrs. Clarence take notice." Emmeline cackled. "Those two have been competing since they were girls. Some things never change." Through the frost-etched window, Annabelle saw Carter and his hired men driving cattle to the sheltered pastures. They'd been working since dawn, preparing for what the old-timers predicted would be a harsh winter. A knock at the door interrupted her thoughts. Lucy stood there, snow dusting her thin coat, clutching a bundle wrapped in brown paper. "Lucy, come in. You must be freezing." Annabelle quickly ushered the girl inside. "Where's Sister Catherine?" "She let me walk alone," Lucy said proudly. "I'm 12 now, old enough for errands." She held out the bundle. "This is from all of us at the orphanage." Annabelle unwrapped it carefully, revealing a pieced quilt top. Each square had been embroidered by different hands, some neat, some crooked, all made with obvious care. In the center, larger letters spelled out, "With love and thanks." "We've been working on it in secret," Lucy explained, bouncing on her toes with excitement. "Even the little ones did a square. See that, Sarah's, the one with the cat." Annabelle traced the stitches with trembling fingers. Each square told a story. Flowers, birds, hearts, even a tiny representation of a sewing machine. "It's beautiful," she managed through the tightness in her throat. Ruth said we should give it to you now, before Christmas, so you could use it during the cold. Lucy's face grew serious. We wanted you to know how much you mean to us. All of us.
Oh, sweetheart.
Annabelle pulled the girl into a hug.
You all mean the world to me, too.
After Lucy left, promising to return Thursday for their regular lesson, Annabelle sat studying the quilt top. Such simple stitches, yet they represented something profound. Connection, gratitude, love given freely.
Going to finish backing that?
Emmeline asked.
Tonight, Annabelle decided. I want to use the blue wool from my old traveling dress. That girl who arrived on the train, she'd be happy knowing her dress became part of this.
The workshop door opened again, bringing a swirl of cold air, and Carter, stomping snow from his boots.
Cattle are settled, he announced.
Then noticed Annabelle's tear-stained cheeks.
What's wrong?
She showed him the quilt top,
explaining Lucy's gift.
His weathered face softened as he examined each square.
Those girls adore you,
he said simply.
The feeling's mutual.
She leaned into his warmth.
I've been thinking.
Dangerous habit, he teased, but his eyes were attentive. What if we hosted Christmas dinner for the orphanage? All of them, the children, Sister Catherine, everyone. We have the space. And...
Yes,
he said immediately.
You didn't let me finish. Don't need to. It's a good idea.
He kissed her forehead. Make your lists. I'll handle the supplies. Planning began immediately. Annabelle threw herself into preparations with an energy that made even Emmeline shake her head. The house needed decorating, food planning for 20 people, small gifts for each child. You're going to wear yourself out, Emmeline warned as Annabelle hemmed another doll dress late one evening. I want it to be perfect. Some of these children have never had a real Christmas with a family.
And what makes a real Christmas?
Emmeline asked shrewdly. The decorations, the food, or the love behind it? Annabelle paused in her stitching.
You're right, of course. But still, you'll fuss.
The old woman smiled.
It's your way. Just remember to breathe occasionally.
The Thursday before Christmas, the sewing lessons took a festive turn. The girls worked on simple ornaments, fabric stars, tiny stuffed angels, ribbons tied into bows.
We're decorating the big tree at the orphanage tomorrow,
Ruth said.
Sister Catherine says we can each put one special ornament on it.
What will yours be? Annabelle asked. Ruth held up a carefully embroidered heart. This, with my mother's initials, so she's part of Christmas too. The other girls shared their choices. Margaret had made a small bird, because Mama loved robins, while Sarah had crafted a lopsided star. For wishing on... Lucy was quiet, working intently on something hidden in her lap.
What about you, Lucy?
Annabelle asked gently. The girl looked up, uncertainty in her eyes.
I made two. Is that allowed? Of course it is. What did you make?
Lucy revealed 2 small fabric angels, one with yellow yarn hair, one with brown.
This one's for the orphanage tree,
she said, indicating the yellow-haired angel. And this one. I thought maybe, could it go on your tree? So we're connected at Christmas? Annabelle's eyes burned with sudden tears.
I would be honored to have your angel on our tree.
Christmas Eve day dawned bright and bitter cold. Carter had brought in a magnificent pine the day before, and now it stood in the parlor, waiting for decoration. Annabelle hung Lucy's angel in a place of honor, right at eye level where everyone would see it. The orphanage contingent arrived in 2 wagons just after noon, children spilling out in a chaos of excitement and wonder. Many had never been inside a real home for Christmas. It smells like heaven, one little boy breathed, taking in the scents of baking bread and roasting meat.
That's Mrs. Rose cooking,
Lucy said proudly, as if she'd had a hand in it herself. Sister Catherine pulled Annabelle aside. This means more than you know. Some of these children have such hard memories of Christmas, last celebrations before parents died, or worse, Christmases where they were forgotten entirely. You're giving them something new to hold on to. The afternoon flew by in a whirl of activity. The children helped finish decorating the tree, each adding their own touch. Carter organized games in the barn safe, warm activities that had them shrieking with laughter. Even teenage Ruth, usually so serious, joined in a spirited game of blind man's bluff. Dinner was a production. The dining table, extended with boards and sawhorses, groaned under the weight of food. Turkey and ham, potatoes and gravy, vegetables and fresh bread, pies and cakes, excess by orphanage standards. But Annabelle had wanted abundance, wanted these children to feel the plenty of being wanted, being celebrated. "Before we eat," Sister Catherine said, "let us give thanks." The prayer was simple but heartfelt, thanking God for food, shelter, and the kindness of friends. When she finished, little Sarah piped up. "Can I add something?" "Of course, child." "Thank you for Mrs. Rowe and Mr. Carter and Mrs. Emmeline, and thank you for letting us belong somewhere today." There wasn't a dry eye at the table. The meal was cheerfully chaotic. Children talked over each other, sharing stories, exclaiming over food. Carter carved meat with patient good humor, making sure each child got their preferred piece. Emmeline held court at one end of the table, regaling the older girls with stories of Christmases past. "Tell about the time the parson's wife set the pudding on fire," Margaret begged. "Well," Emmeline began, eyes twinkling. "This was back in 73, mind you." After dinner, they gathered in the parlor. Annabelle had prepared small gifts for each child, warm mittens she'd knitted, peppermint sticks, and for each girl who attended sewing lessons, a small sewing kit of their very own. "My own needles," Lucy exclaimed, cradling the kit like treasure. "And thread, and scissors, and even a thimble," Annabelle pointed out. "For the accomplished seamstress you've become." Carter had gifts too, small carved animals for the younger children, pocket knives for the older boys, each one unique. "You made these?" Ruth asked, examining a delicate wooden horse. "Long winter evenings," Carter said, almost shyly. "Figured they needed homes." But the children had a surprise too. They gathered near the tree, Sister Catherine raising her hand for silence. "We wanted to give something back," she said. "The children have prepared a song." They arranged themselves carefully. Lucy in the center of the older girls, Sarah and the little ones in front. Then their voices rose in silent night, pure and sweet in the lamplit room. Annabelle reached for Carter's hand, holding tight as the children sang. These orphans, society's forgotten ones, lifting their voices in hope and gratitude. She thought of the girl at the train depot, alone and afraid, certain her scar made her unworthy of love. How far they'd all come. When the song ended, there was a moment of perfect silence, the kind that comes when something sacred has just passed. Then Sarah broke it. "Can we sing another one?" Laughter filled the room, and they sang carols until the little ones began drooping. As Sister Catherine organized the departure, children hugged Annabelle and Carter, voices overlapping in thanks. Lucy hung back, waiting until the others had filed out. Mrs. Rowe. "This was the best Christmas I can remember, maybe the best one ever." "For me too," Annabelle said, meaning it. "Will we see you Thursday?" "Always," Lucy promised. "I'm working on a new dress design, something special." After they left, the house felt oddly empty despite 3 adults remaining. They cleaned in companionable silence, each lost in thought. "Good thing you did," Emmeline finally said. "Those children will remember this Christmas all their lives." "So will I," Annabelle said softly. Later, she and Carter sat before the fire, the quilt from the orphanage girls spread across their laps. The house was quiet, peaceful, filled with the lingering joy of the day. "No regrets?" Carter asked. "About taking on so much joy?" "None." She traced one of the embroidered squares. "A year ago, I thought Christmas would find me alone, unwanted. Instead," she gestured at the decorated room, the evidence of feast and celebration. "Instead, you've built a life," he finished. "Made a difference. Become the heart of this community." "We've built a life," she corrected. "None of this would exist without you." He pulled her closer. "Next Christmas, there might be our own little one here." The hope in his voice made her heart squeeze. They'd not been blessed yet, though they'd only been married 8 months. "Perhaps," she said. "But if not, we still have so much. We have each other. We have Emmeline. We have those girls." "We have everything," he agreed. They sat in comfortable silence, watching the fire die to embers. On the tree, Lucy's angel caught the light, a reminder of connections forged not by blood but by choice, by kindness, by the simple act of opening one's home and heart. "Merry Christmas, Mrs. Rowe," Carter murmured. "Merry Christmas, my love." Outside, snow began to fall again, blanketing the world in fresh white. But inside, warmed by fire and love and the memory of children's laughter, Annabelle felt only peace. This was what she'd traveled so far to find, not just a husband or a home, but a purpose, a place where her scars didn't define her limits, but showed the strength that had brought her through. The mantel clock chimed midnight, ushering in Christmas Day, a new day, a celebration of new life and new hope. And Annabelle Rowe, once the rejected bride at a train depot, now the beloved heart of a growing family, smiled. The evening was unseasonably warm for late winter, one of those false spring days that made the mountains seem to breathe with possibility. Annabelle sat in the parlor of the main house, working on the delicate embroidery of a christening gown while Emmeline dozed in her chair. Through the window, she could see Carter in the corral, working with a young horse, his movements patient and sure. They'd been married nearly a year now, and the rhythms of their life had settled into comfortable patterns. Yet, tonight, something felt different. There was an electricity in the air, a sense of change coming like distant thunder. "You're restless," Emmeline observed, apparently not asleep after all. "Just thinking," Annabelle said, setting down her needlework. "About?" "Everything, nothing." She touched her scar absently, a gesture that had become less frequent over the months. "Do you remember what I asked you that night during the blizzard when we were trying to save Mary Baxter's baby?" "You asked many things that night." "I asked Carter." Annabelle's voice dropped. "I asked if the first time would hurt." Emmeline's eyes sharpened. "Ah, and now you're wondering why you asked about something that had already happened." Heat flooded Annabelle's cheeks. "We've been married a year. Emmeline, everyone assumes. But we've been careful, gentle. He's never pushed, never demanded. We share a bed, we share affection. But you're both still scared," Emmeline finished. "Him of hurting you. You of disappointing him." Annabelle's hands twisted in her lap. "How did you know?" "Child, I've lived long enough to read what's not said as clear as what is. Carter looks at you like you're made of spun glass. You look at him like you're afraid you'll shatter. Fear's no foundation for the marriage bed." "I don't know how to be brave about this." Emmeline leaned forward. "The same way you're brave about everything else. One step at a time, with trust in your partner. That man loves you, Annabelle, not despite your scars, but with them, through them. Maybe it's time you believe that." Before Annabelle could respond, they heard Carter's boots on the porch. He entered, bringing the scent of hay and horses with him. "Ladies." He greeted them, but his eyes lingered on Annabelle with a warmth that made her pulse quicken. "I'll be heading to my cabin," Emmeline announced with suspicious timing. "These old bones need their rest." After she left, Carter settled into the chair beside Annabelle's. "What were you two discussing so seriously?" "The future," Annabelle said, which wasn't entirely a lie. He reached for her hand. "Any particular part of it?" She took a breath, gathering courage. "Carter, can we really talk?"
"Always."
His thumb brushed over her knuckles, a gesture both familiar and dear. "We've been married a year next month." "Best year of my life," he said simply. "But we haven't, that is, we've never truly—" She faltered, frustrated by her inability to speak plainly about something so natural. Understanding dawned in his eyes. "Ah, I know you've been patient, so patient, but I need to know, is it me? The scar? Are you afraid?" "Stop." His voice was gentle but firm. He moved to kneel before her chair, taking both her hands. "It's not the scar. It's never been the scar." "Then what?" He was quiet for a moment, choosing his words. "My brother died because I pushed too hard. Told him he was ready to check the trap lines alone when he wasn't. I've lived with that mistake for 10 years. When I found you at that depot, so proud and hurt and brave, I promised myself I'd never push you into anything before you were ready." "But what if I'm ready now?" The words came out barely above a whisper. His hands tightened on hers. "Are you—" "I don't know. Maybe, yes." She met his eyes. "I'm tired of being afraid, tired of letting Clark Ridley's words have power over me. I'm not damaged goods, and you're not my rescuer. We're husband and wife, and I want us to truly be that." Carter stood, drawing her up with him. His hands framed her face, thumbs gentle against her cheekbones. "You've never been damaged to me. You've been Annabelle, strong, kind, talented, beautiful, my wife, my love." "Then show me," she said. "Help me not be afraid." He kissed her then, different from their usual careful kisses. This had heat beneath the tenderness, promise beneath the restraint. When they parted, both were breathing unsteadily. "Not here," he said. "Our room, our bed, where it should be." They walked hand in hand to their bedroom, the familiar space transformed by the weight of the moment. Annabelle's hands trembled as she began to unpin her hair. "Let me," Carter said softly. His fingers were gentle but sure, removing pins one by one until her hair fell in waves around her shoulders. He combed through it with his fingers, and she closed her eyes at the simple intimacy of the gesture. "Beautiful," he murmured. The scar is part of you." He traced it gently with one finger, from her ear down to where it disappeared beneath her collar. "It tells a story of courage, of saving your brother. How could I see that as anything but beautiful?" Tears pricked her eyes. "I've been so afraid you were just being kind, that someday you'd realize you could have had someone whole. Annabelle." He turned her to face him. "You are whole. You're the woman who dances when she's scared, who holds dying girls and brings babies into the world, who teaches orphans to sew and builds community with needle and thread. You're my wife, and I want you, all of you, more than I've ever wanted anything." "I want you too," she admitted. "I have from the beginning, but I was so scared it would hurt, that I'd disappoint you, that—" "Shh," he kissed her forehead. "Remember what I told you that night in the barn? Not with me, never with me. I meant it then, and I mean it now. We'll go slow. We'll be careful. And if you need to stop, we stop. Promise." "I promise." What followed was a revelation of gentleness. Carter was as good as his word, patient and careful, attentive to every catch in her breath, every tension in her body. His hands were reverent, his touch worshipful, showing her with actions what words couldn't fully convey, that she was treasured, desired, loved completely. When nervousness made her tense, he soothed with soft words and softer touches.
When embarrassment at her inexperience made her want to hide, he coaxed her back with praise and encouragement. And when the moment came that she'd feared for so long, it was with such care that there was no pain, only a sense of completion, of coming home. "Are you all right?" he asked afterward, holding her close. "More than all right," she said, marveling at the truth of it. "I feel whole, truly whole." "You were always whole," he reminded her, "but I'm glad you feel it now." They lay entwined, watching moonlight paint patterns on the walls. Annabelle traced lazy patterns on Carter's chest, feeling a contentment she'd never imagined possible. "What are you thinking?" he asked. "That I wasted so much time being afraid, that we could have had this months ago if I'd been braver." "No." He tipped her chin up. "We had this exactly when we were meant to, when we both were ready, when trust was built strong enough to hold us. Don't regret the path that brought us here." "No regrets," she agreed. "Only gratitude." They talked quietly through the night, sharing things that somehow seemed easier to say in the darkness. Skin to skin. Hopes for children. Dreams for the ranch. Plans for the orphanage girls. The future spread before them, no longer shadowed by fear but bright with possibility. As dawn crept through the windows, Annabelle stirred from a light doze to find Carter watching her. "No regrets in the daylight?" she asked, suddenly shy. "Only one," he said, and her heart skipped before he continued. "That I can't marry you all over again today, just to show the world again that you're mine and I'm yours." "Silly man," she said, but she was smiling. "You're silly man," he agreed, pulling her close. Later, over breakfast, Emmeline took one look at them and snorted. "About time," was all she said, but her eyes were suspiciously bright. The day progressed normally, chores and sewing and the business of living, but everything felt different, brighter, more real. Annabelle caught herself humming as she worked, and more than once found Carter watching her with such open adoration it made her blush. That evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset, Annabelle reflected on the journey that had brought them here. From the terrified woman at the train depot to this, wife, businesswoman, pillar of the community, and now, truly, a woman complete in her marriage. "What are you thinking?" Carter asked, echoing his question from the night before. "About courage," she said. "How sometimes it's fighting through a blizzard to save a life, and sometimes it's just letting yourself be loved." "Both kinds matter," he said, taking her hand. "Yes," she agreed, "they do." As stars began to appear in the darkening sky, Annabelle touched the scar on her neck one more time. It would always be there, always be part of her story, but it no longer defined her limits. She was Annabelle Rowe, scarred and strong, marked and mighty, loved beyond measure. And that was more than enough. It was everything. The night air was warm with promise, and when Carter stood and offered her his hand, she took it without hesitation. No more fear, no more waiting, just two people, imperfect and perfect together, walking hand in hand into whatever tomorrow might bring. In the window of the workshop, the lamp still burned where she'd left it. Tomorrow there would be sewing to finish, girls to teach, lives to touch, but tonight there was only them, and the quiet miracle of love fully realized. "Coming to bed?" Carter asked. "Yes," she said simply, and followed him inside, toward their future, toward hope, toward the life they would build together. One day, one night, one perfect, imperfect moment at a time. Spring had fully arrived in Edge Hollow, painting the meadows with wildflowers and filling the air with the promise of new beginnings. Annabelle stood in her workshop, carefully hanging the new curtains she'd sewn. White cotton with small embroidered roses along the hem, a gift from Lucy, who'd insisted on helping with the design. "Perfect," Emmeline declared from her customary chair. "Bright and cheerful, just like the proprietress."
Through the open window, they could hear the sound of construction. Carter and several neighbors were working on the addition to the workshop, a dedicated classroom for the sewing lessons that had outgrown the current space. What had started with 4 orphan girls now included a dozen young women from town and surrounding ranches, all eager to learn the trade. Mrs. Rowe! Lucy burst through the door, face flushed with excitement. Come see, they're raising the walls. Annabelle followed her outside, where a small crowd had gathered to watch the barn raising. It was tradition in Edge Hollow, when someone needed a building, the community came together. Today, that someone was her. Carter caught her eye from atop the frame, grinning as he helped guide a beam into place. He'd been like this for weeks now, energetic, eager, throwing himself into the project with an enthusiasm that made her heart sing. Their newfound intimacy had brought a lightness to both of them, a joy that colored everything. Annabelle Sarah Morrison waved from where she managed the food table. Can you help me with these pies? We've got hungry men to feed. The day became a celebration. Women organized food while men worked on construction. Children ran between the adults, playing games and stealing cookies. Even Clark Ridley had shown up, though he kept to himself, working silently on the far wall. He's trying, Mrs. Patterson murmured, noticing Annabelle's gaze. Lost his forge last month to drink debts. Carter hired him on for day work, said every man deserves a second chance. Annabelle looked at her husband with renewed admiration. He'd never mentioned hiring Clark, never sought credit for the kindness. That was Carter's way quiet goodness that expected no recognition. As the sun reached its peak, the frame stood complete. The workers broke for lunch, gathering around the tables groaning with food. Annabelle found herself seated between Lucy and Ruth, the orphan girls chattering excitedly about the new classroom. We can have proper cutting tables, Ruth said, and storage for fabric, and maybe even a second sewing machine. Don't get ahead of yourselves, Sister Catherine warned, but she was smiling. Though I must say, the Good Shepherd home has never been so well dressed since you girls started sewing. That's because we're excellent teachers, Lucy said with mock seriousness. We've been teaching the younger ones, just like Mrs. Rowe taught us. The best teachers, Annabelle agreed, ruffling Lucy's hair. After lunch, while the men returned to work, Annabelle walked through her garden with Emmeline. The medicine plants were thriving, and the old woman pointed out which ones were ready for harvest. You've learned well, Emmeline said. Between your sewing and the healing work, you've become quite the businesswoman. I had good teachers, Annabelle replied, linking her arm with Emmeline's. Maybe, but you had the sense to listen, which is more than most. Emmeline paused, studying Annabelle with sharp eyes. You're glowing lately. Any particular reason? He crept up Annabelle's neck. Can't a woman be happy? She can, but this is a particular kind of glow. Emmeline's eyes narrowed. When was your last monthly time? Annabelle stopped walking. She'd been trying not to think about it, afraid to hope. 6 weeks ago, maybe 7. Any morning sickness? Some. I thought it was just nerves about the expansion. Emmeline snorted. Girl, you haven't been nervous about anything since you faced down this town's gossips. You're carrying? It's too soon to know. I've delivered more babies than you've sewn dresses. I know the signs. Emmeline patted her hand. Have you told Carter? I wasn't sure. I didn't want to raise hopes if... Tell him, Emmeline said firmly. That man deserves to share the joy of hoping, even if it's uncertain. Don't rob him of that. That evening, after the workers had gone home and the skeleton of the new classroom stood proud against the sunset, Annabelle found Carter on the porch, sketching plans for shelving. It's going to be perfect, she said, settling beside him. Nothing less for my wife's empire, he teased. By this time next year, you'll be clothing half the territory. Maybe I'll need help by then, she said carefully. Someone small,
who won't be much use at first but might learn the trade eventually.
Carter continued sketching. We could hire one of the younger orphan girls. Maybe... He stopped, pencil freezing mid-stroke. Slowly, he turned to look at her. Annabelle. She took his hand, placed it gently on her still flat stomach. Maybe someone very small, about 7 months from now. If Emmeline's right. The pencil fell from his fingers. We're... I think so, yes. He pulled her into his arms, holding her so tightly she squeaked. Sorry, He set her back, hands hovering like he was afraid to touch her. Should you be sitting? Do you need anything? Should I fetch Emmeline?
I need my husband to breathe.
She laughed. And maybe to kiss me. He obliged, thoroughly and with rising joy. When they parted, both had tears in their eyes. A baby, he whispered.
Our baby.
Scared? She asked. Terrified, he admitted. But the good kind. The kind that means something wonderful is coming. They sat in peaceful silence, watching the stars emerge. Annabelle thought about the journey that had brought them here. The rejection, the fear, the slowly building courage. Every step had led to this moment, this possibility of new life. I want to tell them tomorrow, she said suddenly. Tell who? Everyone. At church. No hiding, no waiting, no fear. She touched her scar, then her stomach. This child will grow up seeing their mother stand tall, marks and all. That's my brave girl, Carter murmured. Sunday morning dawned bright and clear. Annabelle dressed carefully in her blue dress, the one she'd worn to her first social, now let out slightly to accommodate her changing body. Carter helped her with the buttons, his fingers lingering with each one. Ready? He asked. Ready. The church was full, as always. They took their usual pew, Emmeline beside them, Lucy and the orphan girls across the aisle. Reverend Williams delivered his sermon on new beginnings, oddly appropriate for the day. After the service, as people began to file out, Annabelle stood. Reverend, might I say something? Conversation stilled. All eyes turned to her, curious, expectant. She saw Clark in the back, his face unreadable. Sarah Morrison clutched her husband's arm. The orphan girls leaned forward. A year ago, I came to Edge Hollow as a stranger, Annabelle began, her voice carrying clearly through the church. I was rejected, alone, certain my scar made me unworthy of love or belonging. She touched the mark on her neck, no longer self-conscious. But this town, most of you, showed me differently. You gave me work, friendship, purpose. You trusted me with your clothes, your children, your stories. You became my family. Murmurs of approval rippled through the congregation. Lucy beamed at her. Carter Rowe saw past surface marks to the person beneath. He offered shelter to a stranger and love to a scarred woman. He gave me a name, a home, a future. She took Carter's hand, drawing strength from his steady presence. And now, God willing, come autumn, he'll give our child a father. The church erupted. Women surged forward with congratulations. Men slapped Carter's back. Children asked excited questions about babies. Even Clark Ridley, catching her eye across the chaos, offered a small nod, perhaps not forgiveness, but acknowledgement. Lucy fought through the crowd to throw her arms around Annabelle. A baby. Oh, can I make clothes for the baby? I'm counting on it, Annabelle assured her. Who else would I trust with my child's wardrobe? The celebration continued at the social, where news spread to those who'd missed church. Annabelle found herself the center of attention, but this time, she didn't mind. These people had become her community, her extended family. Their joy felt genuine, earned through months of building relationships one stitch at a time. That evening, as they finally returned home, Annabelle paused at the door of her workshop. Tomorrow, lessons would resume. Orders would need filling. The new classroom would continue rising. Life would go on. Richer now for the promise growing within her. "No regrets?" Carter asked, echoing their old refrain. She looked at him, this good man who'd seen her truly from the beginning. Thought of Emmeline in her cabin, probably brewing some pregnancy tea, of Lucy and the girls, already planning baby clothes, of the town that had become home, the work that had become purpose, the scar that had become simply part of her story. "None," she said firmly. "Not one." Inside the house, on the table, sat the quilt the orphan girls had made, now finished, backed with the fabric from her old traveling dress, past and present stitched together, creating something beautiful and useful, like her life, like the child growing within her. Annabelle Rowe laid her hand on her stomach, feeling the future quicken beneath her palm. She'd thought her story would end at that train depot, scarred and rejected. Instead, it had just been beginning. Now, standing in her home, surrounded by love, carrying new life, she knew the truth. Every scar was a story, every mark a map of survival. And sometimes, if you were very lucky, they led you exactly where you needed to be. The lamp in the window cast warm light into the gathering dusk, a beacon of home, of hope, of dreams stitched carefully into reality. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new joys, new possibilities. Tonight, there was peace and love, and the quiet certainty that she was exactly where she belonged. The girl with the lightning scar had found her home at last, and it was beautiful. Thank you so much for listening to this story. I hope Annabelle and Carter's journey touched your heart as much as it touched mine while sharing it. I'd love to know where in the world you're listening from. Please leave a comment below, and let's share our thoughts about this tale of courage, love, and finding where we belong. If you enjoyed this story, please subscribe to Wild West Stories 1850 for more tales from the American frontier. Give this video a like, and don't forget to hit the hype button so more people can discover and enjoy these heartfelt stories. Until next time, partners.